And we're back with another episode of Today and Tomorrow in Scottsdale. I'm Don Henniger, and joining me, as always, is my podcast partner and a man with rhythm and rhyme, Kevin Maxwell.
How you doing?
I'm good, man. How are you doing?
I'm ready for some sonnets today.
Yeah, we got some too. Yeah. You know, we're gonna get some verse, and we're gonna
haiku.
We might do it. We're gonna see about that, but we have an expert's gonna take us through that, don't we?
Okay.
So today we get to talk about a new subject. We haven't had a poet on our show before. It's another example of people who make Scottsdale really special and really unique. Our guest is Lois Roma-Deeley. She's Scottsdale's Poet Laureate, who recently came to our attention when the Academy of American Poets announced that you have been awarded a nice $50,000 grant. Pretty cool. One of 22 Poet Laureates around the country to get a grant like that. And now you've got an event coming up in Scottsdale that we're going to talk a little bit about. But first, welcome, Lois.
Thank you for having me.
Great to have you on board. Now, Lois is a poet. She's an editor and she's an educator. Her sixth poetry collection is called Waiting for the Mercy Ship. She's a 4-time recipient of creative writing residences at the Ragdale Foundation, I guess it's called. And she was named the U.S. Professor of the Year by the Carnegie Foundation for the Advancement of Teaching and the Council for Advancement and Support of Education. And you take a deep breath after that.
Yeah,
Yes.
That's quite a resume.
That's a heck of a resume. Lois, tell us a little bit about your background, where you grew up, and how you got into the world of poetry.
We're originally from Long Island, New York. You can probably tell from my accent.
In there, yeah.
We've been, which is good because my students think I'm tough.
Yeah.
You know, but we've been in Scottsdale since 1979.
Oh,
so,
you're almost a native.
Yes.
Yeah.
My husband used to work for the city of Scottsdale.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah. So 27 years.
Wow.
So people always ask about how I got into poetry, and it's, it's kind of a cliche to say that it kind of found me rather than I found it. 2 stories I can tell you. I come from an Italian-American family. I'm the grandchild of immigrants, both sides. So language was really an important part. It was like food for us. So I remember my cousins lived like 2 blocks away, and how it is in our family, the cousins were like my siblings. So I was about 8 or 9, and I can remember this distinctly. I was in her bedroom on the floor. It must have been February because it was raining, and there was like this glossy magazine, like a Valentine's Day thing. And I opened it up, and there was a poem by Edgar Allan Poe, Annabel Lee. And I read it, and then my cousin said, she's 5 years older than me. She's like, well, that's true. And I started crying. But more importantly, and I always say this, is that my older brother, he's 7 years older than me. He was the first person in my immediate family to graduate high school and then go on to college. So he would come home from college and he would teach me. And he was a high school teacher for like 33 years. But this is when he was a young man, 18, 19 years old. And he'd come home and he has a gift for language. And he would read the French symbolists to me in French then translate it. And he read to me some Italian poets. I remember him saying, can you hear the sound of the bells in that? I remember him reading to me Wordsworth's poem, which isn't a very good poem of Wordsworth, who I love, but We Are 7. And it's this kind of maudlin poem about this girl sitting in a gravesite with her family. And I read it and I was like crying, oh, Nick, But he also has a minor in philosophy. So in addition to teaching me poetry, he taught me how to think. And he would say things like, tell me the nature of good and evil. And I'm like, I'm 12 years old, Nick.
Right, yeah.
But he didn't let me off the hook.
Right, yeah.
He'd say, you're not thinking. Tell me the nature of good and evil. So I have to come up with an answer. He still does that. He told me like 2 days ago. I was so tired from my trip.
Is he still asking the same question?
No, he's a teacher.
That could change over the years, right?
He's like, I'm just reading the French symbolists, and I'm like, Nick, I need to go to bed. I've been up, since 4 o'clock in the morning. So, and then my family, the best we had to offer was to sit around the dining room table at Thanksgiving, and it didn't matter how old you were, but you couldn't be boring. So everybody could tell a story, and they'd listen, but you couldn't be boring. I always say that's why I'm not a fiction writer, because they were much better storytellers than I could ever be.
What an influence your brother must have been for you.
Yeah. Then when my older cousins went to college, I stole their poetry books. So I still have them.
Well, it sounds like
Sorry, Ray.
it sounds like poetry hit you in two different ways. One, intellectually through thinking, and then emotionally, because your early poems, made you cry and struck your emotions. So kind of a dual purpose right there, both head and heart.
Yeah, when I teach my poetry classes, I often say to my students, "Do you have best friends? Who has a best friend?" Everybody raising their hand. I said, "Do you know everything about your best friend?" And they said, "Yeah." I said, "Well, aren't you like bored? I mean, why are you still hanging around this person?" And trying to lead them to the idea that certain experiences, certain people, the more you get to know them, the deeper the experience is. And that's what I love about poetry, is that it endeavors to articulate the unseen, to give expression to that which, is difficult, more often than not, impossible to express. It's like I remember when I was like in my 20s, and I had my wisdom teeth out. Both sets was miserable. I looked like Nixon for 2 weeks. And,
not a good thing back then.
And my my jowls were out like this. And my husband would be sitting on the couch with me, and I'd be crying because it really hurt, and he'd be telling me jokes. And so I'd be laughing and crying at the same time. And that's kind of like what poetry does for me. It does that really layered experience. It takes us, as my professors would say, takes us elsewhere.
So when did you know that you were going to be a good poet? How did you discover that?
Well, that's not a question I think I can actually answer for the word good.
Right.
I've been working at my craft for decades. And, people say, well, I had one student come in my office and plop herself down. And I love the student. And she's like, "So, how long is this going to take?" I said, it takes a long time to be a poet. You need to read. You need to take classes. You need community. You need to experiment, which people think they think, "Oh, I'm failing," but you're really not failing. You're enlarging what you think you can do. And if you know your literary history, there are some really famous, super famous poets who are dead. If you read the work that led up to the famous poems now, they were working towards something. So we need to have patience and respect for our own effort.
That's in short supply these days, Kevin. When you think about the world we live in today, respect and patience, those are not at the top of everybody's list these days.
Not in today's day and age.
That's a good lesson there, huh?
Yeah. So how did you become, are you Scottsdale's Poet Laureate?
Yes.
Recognized by the city, or is it because you're a Poet Laureate living in Scottsdale, they're the only ones?
No, I'm the Poet Laureate of Scottsdale.
Oh, great.
The mayor installed me. Gave a little proclamation. It was really kind of fun.
And how long have you had that
From
position?
21.
Okay, so a while now.
Yeah.
Okay, do you speak at events like Veterans Day events and Memorial Day events, things like that?
Yeah, I give readings, and people contact me, and I do all kinds of stuff. I'll be doing a lot next year. My new book's coming out, so I'll be giving some readings and workshops. Just there's a big community out there, which is why my PoetryFest on October 19th at Scottsdale Community College is about connection.
Okay.
Connection to poetry.
Right.
Connection to yourself as in this place and time, but also connection to the artistic community, of which there is quite a bit.
Is there?
and my sense is that not everybody knows what's going on. So I'm hoping just to kind of connect people.
Okay.
So that particular event is going to have 2 parts. The first part is I will lead a workshop and you don't have to have any experience, or you can be writing for a long time. You can be a prose writer. Some of my visual artist friends are coming. So I'll lead a workshop with little exercises. And I always tell my students, look, the poetry police are not going to come to your house.
Poetry police.
They're not going to say, hands up against the wall. You didn't write a sonnet today. I mean, so, maybe they'll be perfect and be imperfect, but we will look at ourselves. And the title of the workshop, the PoetryFest, is These Mountains Know My Name.
Say that again. The East Mountains know my name.
These mountains.
These mountains know my name.
We live in the valley.
Of course, yeah, that's great.
So because I think the last couple of years, they've been, as I say, uneasy. They have been uneasy times, and I think a lot about isolation, a lot of disconnection. So we need to celebrate ourselves, but also celebrate how our identity and our artistic endeavors are shaped by our time and place. I like to say, we move through the world, but the world moves through us. So
that
the
leads,
second. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. No, keep going.
No, the second half is there'll be other literary organizations that will come and network with people.
Okay.
So that's October the 19th for people, just to give you a little plug here. It's Scottsdale Community College.
Yes.
A day-long deal. And as people listen to this, if you've got any interest in poetry and writing poetry or understanding poetry, that's a day you want to mark on your calendar.
Yep. And you need to sign. It's free.
Free to go.
And we sign up at Eventbrite, so I know how many people are coming.
Okay.
I get a little ticket, but it's free.
Yeah.
So where can people find information on that?
They can go to Eventbrite.
To Eventbrite, okay.
And just put in PoetryFest, These Mountains Know My Name.
PoetryFest, These Mountains Know My Name. I've got a question for you, because as you talk about poetry, what I'm sensing is a real spiritual connection. Does that play a part in either who you are, or is that what makes poetry? Is there a poetry spiritual connection there? I'm sensing one there. It seems like I don't mean with God and religion, but just a real sense of spiritual awareness.
I guess I'd ask you to define for me what you mean by spiritual.
Connected to the earth, connected to the world around us, stopping to be present in the moment where you can experience life and then be able to reflect on that kind of spirituality.
Yeah, I think for me, I like to say poetry doesn't always have any answers, but it does teach you to pay attention. It does. At the very core of it, I think poetry is a kind of bearing witness to our human experience. The thing is that I think people don't understand is that poetry is like a really big country with all different kinds of, ways to approach, types, eras, and things change over time. I mean over time, I mean like the last 25,000 years. Also, there's so many myths, I think, are surrounding poetry that really kind of irritate me. One is that the poet is this crazed creature, which, by the way, goes back to Plato. We can blame him for that. In a garret, like who has garrets anymore, alone. But in truth, that's, if you study your literary history, that's not accurate. Poets, writers, artists need community. And the other one is that nobody cares about poetry anymore. And I can tell you, I have given readings all over the country. And just recently, as Poet Laureate read a poem for the mayor's State of the City address in January.
I think I remember that, actually. Now that I do remember that.
Were you
now.
There?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was me.
Yeah, now I remember.
Was there, right? There was like 300 people.
Yeah.
And they weren't my tribe. I mean, they weren't like artists. But afterwards, people came up to me and they were really clearly moved. So I always say,
Wonderful.
You're telling me that poetry doesn't, nobody likes it or reads it or whatever. except when things go wrong, right? Then you're
Right.
calling the poet. Or when
Right.
things go right,
Yeah.
like give me a poem for a wedding, or
Mhm.
give me, when 9/11 happened, my students came into to our classroom and they're like, "Oh gosh, what are we doing here? People are jumping out of buildings. This is like a waste of time." And I said to them, "No, writers are needed now more than ever, because what we do is to try to at least put it in context, not so much to give an answer, but to draw kind of like a box around it and say, what about this?" So those are the couple of things that I always kind of say to my.
So Scottsdale, most western town.
Yes.
We have cowboy artists here. We
Yes.
have the Museum of the West. Is there cowboy poetry?
Yes, I think there is.
Yeah.
I am not that familiar
You're not
with
that
it.
familiar with it? Okay.
But I certainly, like I said, poetry's like a big country with all
Right.
kinds of approaches, and good for us.
Right.
It's not just one thing. It shouldn't be just one thing. Like, why should art just be one thing? As a poet, I'm always interested on what's the cutting edge, because I really like risk-taking kinds of poetry rather than what I might call derivative. Now, it's kind of like when if you study art at all, and you study like the Impressionists,
Mm-hmm.
and this actually does connect to poetry. Sorry, I'm a teacher, so this is like
I love this. Is great. We're all learning something here. This is good.
Travel. So I forgot. I think it was 19. I always get the date wrong. 1914, 1911, the Armory Show in New York, where they had this brand new artwork, right? And everybody went, "Oh, well, what is this?" But even during that artwork, or that exhibit, poets like like Wallace Stevens went and inspired him. So that was like in the early part of the 20th century. And now you kind of speed up to now, and now everybody has like Monet on their coffee mugs.
Mhm.
But
Right.
at one time, that was the innovation. So I'm always interested. And they were pretty radical. I mean, across the board, not only in visual art and poetry and filmmaking. I don't know if you are familiar with that, music.
So you said the cutting edge.
Yeah.
What is the cutting edge of poetry?
Well, I don't know, because I was one of the opportunities I may have as being a fellow for the Academy of American Poets. Being a fellow is I might be able to write an essay for them that they send out. So I've been thinking about this because I really got obsessed with. I'm sorry to bore you, but I really got obsessed with literary theory in graduate school. So what I did was I taped together like pieces of typing paper, and I started from Plato all the way to present day, and then I read a lot and I studied a lot. So I want to know the various ways that communities thought of poetry. So now I can give a lecture about the 25,000 years in about 15 minutes.
Wow.
So really it goes to Plato's time, poetry as what they call mimesis, like copy, because he believed in the ideal forms. Then it went to like Pope's time with poetry as idea, like, Pope, the proper study of mankind, that one. Then it went with Wordsworth, which was very innovative in the 1850s, as poet as actually the poet himself at the time, became the center. And then I would say in the 20th century, it was poetry for poetry's sake or art for art's sake. But now I'm thinking it's shifting. So I was just thinking about this morning, so I really don't have a very cogent answer for you. But I've noticed that the trend, I'm saying trend, I'm not saying that that's where we are, is almost like poetry as object, So you have innovative things like erasure poetry or strike through poetry, or even like poetry and music. People think like poetry slams and rap are brand new, but really they're not. They go back to the Greeks.
Right.
That's how the Greeks, that's how they imparted their knowledge, was through poetry. And every time I hear somebody cranking out like a poetry slam thing, I think, Plato went like that.
So who's the poets that I should be paying attention to now, do you think, that I may not be aware of?
It depends on what era.
Okay.
Some of the U.S. Poet Laureates, I think it's Ada Limon right now. I love her work. Natalie Diaz, who teaches at ASU, young poet, just won the Pulitzer. She's at ASU.
Is that right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I like Natalie. She's really nice. She's a good poet. My former professor is Rita Dove, who's U.S. Poet Laureate.
That's a name we all know. Times. Sure. Yeah.
Norman Dubie
you know Rita Dove?
I know the name. I don't know her.
Oh yeah, she's lovely.
She's pretty famous.
Yeah.
And then, do you have Rita Dove books at home on your bookshelf?
I know of. I just know the name.
Okay.
Her poetry is just
I've
wonderful.
read some of her poetry. I don't remember where, but yeah. That's one of the reasons I know it. Yeah.
She was on my committee.
Yeah.
Norman Dubie just passed, was my chair of my committee. And of course, Alberto Rios. These are all Arizona poets.
Yeah.
At one time, I was shopping and I was like, how many famous poets are within like a mile of each other?
Is that right?
Oh, yeah. That's what I'm saying. But, so some of my favorite poets, I love Denise. These are Denise Levertov. Comes to mind. Of course, I love Wallace Stevens. Not that
you mixed him twice now.
Yeah, that's right.
But because you know what? He's like one of those early part of the 20th century innovative, poets. And of course, he had this fight with William Carlos Williams. So that's interesting. I really love the women poets because I'm a woman poet, obviously, and I think there's a lot of cutting edge. When you've been pushed to the margins, which is true. Oh, by the way, when I made a second thing in graduate school, taped all the things, and I started with Sappho, and it was like nothing until I got to like Virginia Woolf.
Really?
Yeah. So, and somebody asked me this morning, well, do you think they weren't there? I said, no, we have to go find our literary grandmas, and they're there. I mean, and they are like radical.
Really?
Oh my gosh, it's so great. I mean, when they did not talk about that. They did not give up. They did not give in, and they're there, So I have a lot of books at home. I read a lot, Yeah. I have a lot of friends too, poets.
So talk a bit more about that. That's interesting when we talked about the Arizona connection, how there's a lot of poets right here in the Valley, huh?
Famous poets. Like if you buy the Norton Anthology, the big fat book, they're like, at one time, there was like, I don't know, 4 or 5 of them within a couple of mile radius.
Why do you guys network and stuff or get together? Or?
Well, I say hi. Sometimes, like I think it was the Phoenix Library, I don't know if they still do, this was years ago, they would bring in these really famous poets like Lucille Clifton, and half of or the majority of the people in the audience were, us, and I tell my students, this is free. This is, she's a lovely poet too. So when I was full-time at Paradise Valley Community College, I started the creative writing program there as well as the women's studies program. And I also started a reading series. So I would bring various poets in from around the country, like Martha Collins, who's a good friend, Cynthia Hogue, who we used to work for ASU, is one of their Maxine Marshall Scholar. She's down at Tucson now. She's a good friend. Jan Beatty from Pittsburgh, Judith Vollmer. These are just, a lot of people. I have a big list.
Yeah.
Well, it's like a network, I guess. You would know each other. I'm curious, why do you think so many are in Arizona?
I don't know. I just think it's just, I think I just got lucky.
Yeah.
I think it was just, who would have thought, I mean, Rita was my professor before she won the Pulitzer.
That's why I remember Rita, because she was an ASU.
She won the Pulitzer.
And won the Pulitzer.
She was
so
one of the young. I think she's the second African-American woman to ever win. And her poetry is amazing. Yeah, so I'm in contact with her. Everybody's in contact with her, but I know her for a long, long time now. And Norman, I studied with him. And Tito, Alberto Rios, who's wonderful as well.
Yeah.
There's all the poets in down by U of A, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So
what's your
we're out
poetry discipline now? Are you writing on a regular basis? What is that? So what's that discipline look for you? What's that like for you now?
I'm now not teaching full time, though I'm doing various things. And I love teaching. I love my time at the school. I loved it. It was marvelous. But now it's time for me to turn my attention to myself. So I just finished the 6th collection, which is coming out. And I think I have, you know, the seeds of a new manuscript. You know, I love making books. My favorite part of making a book is when you're about halfway in it and the poems start talking to each other. And I always say, sometimes I write a poem that answers a question I didn't know I asked.
Really?
Oh yeah, that's the fun of it. That's why I tell my students, revision is your friend. You don't ever know where it's going to take you. So I get up early in the morning, about 5 o'clock, and I do a lot of my poetry stuff from about 5 to 8, depending. Although now I'm editing and my eyes really hurt.
That's a good daily routine, though. Every day you do that.
Yeah.
Wow. That's really,
I can do that now because I'm not doing all this other stuff. And I have wonderful students and wonderful colleagues, and I love teaching, and I do. And I love bringing the love of poetry to other people and demystifying it and say, hey, come try your hand at it. Come on. It's just poetry, you know.
Me inspired. I want to go try some poetry.
Yeah, I know, right.
Join our workshop, seriously, you know. But so there's nothing else like it. And I've also had the pleasure of working with collaborating with visual artists as well as musicians. My colleague at Paradise Valley Community College, Dr. Christopher Cinto, and I wrote a music drama a few years ago. And that became the basis of my 4th book, High Notes, which was really interesting because and I wrote what they call the book for it. It means the script. And we got a Zony nomination, which I was really,
good. Yeah.
And then my other friend, who's a visual artist, Beth Shader, and I met at Ragdale. Oh, now it's a long time ago, but we created poetic dialogues and she does most of the work. I just curate the poets. So we put the visual artist connection with the poets, and then we'll see what happens with that. So we've done various iterations of that. She and I are working on that. And then I'm working with the Scottsdale Arts. In fact, it will be up in Scottsdale Center for the Arts. Yeah. One of my poems is up there with some visual art. And we even created a little prompt. So
they displayed on the wall there or something?
Yeah, it'll be on the wall. Okay. And I forgot the name of it. I'm sorry.
Is it there now or is it coming up?
No, it's coming out October 17th.
Oh, wow.
Just before
That's right before your thing.
Yeah. So Laura and I have worked on that. And I think the way that we're going to set it up, my poem's up there, the one I read for the city address, it's called Let It Be So. And I think we're going to, I wrote a little prompt, okay, write a blessing, take a blessing. So that would be fun.
It sounds like you're really stretching the genre to new places. If you're working with visual artists and musicians and all kinds of things like that, I mean, that's not what I would think traditional poets would do.
Yes, I know.
Right?
I'm not afraid of the poetry police.
Is that right?
I'm not afraid. No, I'm not afraid.
That's that cutting edge stuff that maybe you were talking about.
Yeah.
It's so exciting. Yeah. It is so joyful. It is such a joyful experience. And I would hope, I have my students come into class and they're just so fearful. And first thing I have them do is flick the little editor off their shoulder.
Really?
Oh, yeah. I'm like, hey, it's just write something. It's not, if you study the poets, the famous poets, and look at their revisions, it should free you. It's okay. You're not expected to be perfect. You shouldn't be perfect the first time because you don't know where your art is going to lead you. But working with other artists has just been a joy for me because it's just fun. It's you and the art, and you're inspiring each other. You're talking about things. It leads you in places you never I never thought I would go. So
Do you have people who you look to edit your poems at all?
yes, I have a longtime friend of mine. Long time.
She's your regular editor?
Yeah, she's mean too.
Mhm.
She's mean. She'll let me get away with anything. She does not let me get away with stuff. And I have another friend that she's like my first reader. Like I said, okay, before I send it to my editor, let me read this to you out loud. Like when this person who's a long, long time now, I'm talking decades. So before there was even the internet, I would read my poem into the answering machine, and then she would edit it, and then read it back to me. That's how long that she's.
Wow.
No kidding.
Oh yeah, she
Guys were innovative back then.
She does not let me get away with stuff, and she always says that. One time she walked over to my keyboard, and the space bar, and she went like this to the space bar. She said, "Fill it up."
Really?
Yeah.
That's pressure. That's what editors are for.
Fill it up. And I'm like, oh, I don't want to.
Don, I may be speculating here, but I would say, because we talk a lot about the divisiveness going on today and age, right, in our city, in our country. Yep. I bet you that if some people would read some more poetry or to look at it a little bit in a different way, I would venture to say this world might be a better place.
I would venture to say I think you might be right.
Yeah?
Yep. I think so.
Just listen to Lois talk about this stuff, and collaboration and the critical thinking that it brings.
Appreciating what's good,
right?
All that.
Exploration of boundaries and things like that. Those are all muscles we need to be exercising at all time.
People need to be taught how to hear poetry,
Okay.
And how to read it. And I liken it to sports because my husband's a sports person. I am not. Okay. But if I sit down with him and watch like the Final Four, he is kind enough to say, "Did you see that?" And of course I didn't. And then he will explain it to me. And then all of a sudden I can see it.
Right.
And I can enjoy it. And that's what I think is not happening across the board about, why poetry's gotten such a bad rap. All those really erroneous myths that surround it. I have a quote I wanted to read to you from Kurt Vonnegut. This kind of goes to what you were saying before, if you'll let me.
You bet.
He says, practice any art, music, singing, dancing, acting, drawing, painting, sculpting, poetry, fiction, essays, reportage, no matter how well or how badly. Not to get money or fame, but to experience becoming, to find out what's inside you, to make your soul grow.
That's awesome.
I love that.
Yeah,
and I think that's a really good way to draw our podcast with you to a close today. As I'm starting to understand now a little bit more about why Scottsdale has a Poet Laureate.
That's right.
And how that might really work to make our city and our society a better place. No question. And people like Lois doing it.
And I would agree. And I would say that the nature, because we have such a warm and welcoming community here, that it would naturally attract people who are good at this particular discipline.
I like to say Scottsdale is a poem in the making.
Right.
I love that. That's
just
true.
Go look around. We've got the mountains. You've got just even the names of plants and, Wingate Pass, the Gateway Loop, Brill Bush, Acacia Tree. Come on.
Love it. October 19th, Scottsdale Community College. Spend the day with Lois. Help raise the level of poetry. Find out if maybe there's a poet in you that you didn't know about.
That's right.
And discover for yourself. Lois, what a delight it's been to have you. We learned a lot today, and we learned a lot about why you're part of what makes Scottsdale a great city.
It is a great place. A poem in the making.
Absolutely. And thanks to all of you for listening. See you next time for our latest episode of Today and Tomorrow in Scottsdale.